Good morning. Thanks for coming. Can you all hear me in the back pretty well? Okay, great. So my name is Joseph Dadzi. I'm a group program manager in the software distribution team, and my team is responsible for the Windows Update infrastructure, WSAS, and some System Center online services that we are trying to build. So hopefully I'll be able to walk you through some of the some of the tips and tricks on how to deploy WSAS 3.0 and answer your questions. I'll prefer that the questions sort of come towards the end so we can have a smooth flow, and then at the end we can answer all those questions. So if you have a question, please hold it towards the end. How many of you have deployed WSAS 3? Yeah, almost quite a few people. WSAS 2? Great. SAS 1.0? Are you still running SAS 1.0? I need to talk to you after. Okay, anyway, so it seems like you guys are all prepared, right? Some of the prerequisites were basically knowing about general patch management and familiarity with WSAS 2.0, so I don't repeat a lot of material that you may know already. So we'll briefly go over the WSAS 3.0 features for those that haven't deployed it yet. We'll walk through some of the deployment options and some key items that you need to be aware of and things that you need to take care of. We'll talk about what if you're deploying WSAS 3 with System Center Configuration Manager 2007, since it relies on WSAS 3.0 for its update management. And then I'll introduce, what changes are coming in WSAS 3.0 SP1. Okay, that's something new, so hopefully it'll be interesting. All right, so what is WSAS 3? WSAS, right? I'm sure all of you remember Code Red, NIMDA, and all the Blaster and all the security issues that unfortunately we've had in the past. So one of the goals of WSAS is to provide an easy, free solution for customers like yourselves to be able to update Microsoft software. Underneath it, it also provides some infrastructure that a lot of our products use. So you have consistency in scanning and reporting across all the Microsoft products. So you have products like Small Business Server, System Center Essentials, System Center Configuration Manager 2007, Forefront Client Security, all building on that same scanning technology. So regardless of which tool you're using, you have consistency in scanning and distribution of updates. The other key thing I wanted to mention here is WSAS, even though the infrastructure services System Center Essentials and System Center Configuration Manager, it does not natively provide a user experience for third-party updates. So if you want to deploy non-Microsoft updates, you either have to use System Center Essentials or Configuration Manager, or you can write your own code that talks to the public WSAS APIs to distribute those updates. You, however, won't be able to see it through the UI. The other thing that we try to make sure in the charter is, regardless of the solution, say you're a large corporation, you're planning to use Configuration Manager 2007, but you haven't finished your deployment, you can start with WSAS and migrate seamlessly to those products when you're done. If you're a small business, the same thing, you can easily migrate to System Center Essentials. So that's sort of the background. Now, before I go into the features, I want to give you some history or trends that we see with WSAS. So as of September, we're seeing more than 400,000 servers actually talk directly to Microsoft. So these are servers at the front node out there, and you can see sort of the growth part. It's pretty amazing how much it's been growing over time. And then on the bottom, you can see WSAS 3.0. We released it in April, and the trends of what we are seeing. Now that data is all anonymous data from users that enable the option in WSAS to roll up their status or their configuration to Microsoft. So it's an option in the tool that you can set up. But you see, so a lot of customers actually doing trials, 0 to 5 PCs in a test environment, and then over time you're seeing the number of trials sort of reduce and the number of deployments increase over time. So that shows that the adoption of WSAS 3 is actually going pretty fast, and they're actually pleased about that. So sort of interesting statistic. The other thing that was interesting is we do an annual survey of IT managers, professionals across the world, Europe mostly, and the US and South America, and we sort of see trends of what are the most used tools. And it's actually WSAS is being used by over 70% of corporations to do desktop management. So overall, great momentum on the technology. It's proven, it works, and we're pretty happy about that. So just wanted to share that statistic out there. So at a high level, what are the features that we put in there, right? We bucketed the features across different categories. One was simplicity, performance, ease of deployment, and scalability. And I'll talk about each of those categories. So in simplicity, one of the big feedbacks that we got with the WSAS 2, and for those of you that deployed the WSAS 2, you're familiar with it. You run setup, it finishes, it launches the console, and okay, what's next? Did I do everything right or not, right? You didn't have a step-by-step way to walk you through configuring the proxy, picking the locales of updates that you want to get down or not, right? You had to go figure it out yourself. So what we've added is a configuration wizard that walks you through the step-by-step of configuring the server, making your choices right after install, so that once you finish that initial install, you're set and you can go deploy updates. It'll test your proxy connections, right? In the past, in 2.0, you deploy and you find out you're not getting updates. And what did I do wrong? And you go look at it, and maybe you've misconfigured a proxy server setting. So all those are in the initial configuration wizard to help you actually set those configuration changes. The other thing we did is this configuration wizard is available after setup. They can go launch if you want to change some setting, but you don't want to go tweak around, dig around where the options are. You can do that also. The biggest change by far, and I'll show you in the UI shortly, is we moved from the web UI to an MMC-based console. And for those of you that are using 2.0, the web UI console is no longer in 3.0. But we added some other cool capabilities in the 3.02, the ability for you to be able to manage from an XP machine, just like you could do through the browser. You can install the console on an XP or Vista desktop and remotely manage that server that is sitting in your data center. The other thing that we got feedback was on approval groups. We had one approval, approve for detect and approve for install. You didn't have that much flexibility in it. We've added a capability for you to set multiple approvals in the UI, so you can have different rules around how you want approvals to happen within your environment. Reporting rollup. How many of you are familiar with the reporting rollup tool that we provided for the WSAS 2.0? Very few. Okay, so that's something that we actually got a lot of feedback about. Hey, we need a way to roll up reports to the server from the WSAS 2.0 server. So we did a sample tool out there, but just like we saw in this room, lots of people did not know that this tool existed. So that capability is integrated into the product, and I'll show you how it works. The concept is that you can get an organizational view of all your WSAS servers and clients being deployed, regardless of which server they're sitting on. You don't have to log into each console to see the deployment status. How many of you image machines when deploying PCs, right? And got all these duplicate IDs in the UI, etc. So we've added a cleanup wizard that you can use to clean up, duplicate IDs. Or if you've had a lot of updates that are superseded, there's a cleanup wizard that can help you clean out the UI so your UI is not cluttered like it used to be in the WSAS 2.0. Now, in terms of performance, one big thing that we did was to support native x64. So you can install a 64-bit version of WSAS on a 64-bit server and get all the performance benefits of that 64-bit environment. Vista is also another area where we try to make a bunch of improvements. So with Vista, bits 3.0, anybody deploy Vista yet? Not yet, okay. There's one gentleman in the back there, yeah. So with Vista, Bits added a capability called peer caching, which allows you to be able to, in a local subnet, peer machines can get updates from other machines that may have downloaded them. So we've added a capability into WSAS 3 so that if you have a set of Vista machines on a local subnet, they don't all have to hit the server. One hits the server, gets the content, and the peers get from it in the local subnet. So that's also another thing that we did to optimize the distribution speed. In general, the UI is about twice as fast as what it was in 2.0. The server scales a lot more. There's a lot of performance improvements out there. It's kind of interesting. We put a limit in 2.0 to say if a number of clients being supported reaches 40,000, we generate an error. And we actually got support calls. Some customers were running into that limit. So we know a lot of people are using from pretty large accounts out there, and we've improved on that performance. The two other areas that we worked on were reliability, right? Mom Park was a big thing. I got lots of requests. How can I monitor, WSAS using Mom, or Operations Manager? So we've provided a Mom Park for WSAS 3 that you can use to monitor the server. We brought back the SAS1 feature of NLB, so you can support NLB using a WSAS. We support SQL clustering, so if you want high availability and redundancy, you can use NLB and SQL clustering to achieve that in WSAS 3.0. The other thing that we did around replicas was in 2.0, when you say you synchronized all languages, 5 languages on the upstream server. When they did a replica, all 5 locales went down. In 3.0, you can actually only do subsets of those languages down. So that saves you the bandwidth transfer significantly. And the other thing that we did was you don't have to reinstall if you want to change from autonomous to replica. You can just go into the UI and set it, and that will change that. So there are a lot of changes there. The other thing, how many of you have bosses that say, hey, I want to see the patch deployment status. I don't believe you that everything is okay. I want to see the report, right? And so we provided a read-only role where you can add your bosses or other people that are interested into a read-only role. They can see reports, they can see the status, but they cannot change anything and mess up your environment. So that's also another thing that we added from a deployment perspective. So that's at a high level what these capabilities are. I'll quickly walk through the UI to sort of show the folks that haven't seen it and sort of talk a little bit about the features before we dive into the deployment in more detail. Okay. So these are new snazzy UI for the WSAS 3.0. So there are a couple of things that you notice, right? At the top level, we've added a lot more visual cues into your status. So you get a high-level summary of all updates, critical security updates, or the updates for the WSAS itself. And you can add more categories to this. So it's simple, red, yellow, green. Are you healthy with critical updates or not? Are you healthy with security updates or not? You can quickly see those at a glance. You can also drill down into specific categories, right? So you could go in and look at critical updates if you wanted. You can go into computers. You can drill down your computers node. Let me stay here for a second. So one thing that we've done in the UI is we've tried to minimize the amount of clutter that you see in the UI. So when you go into each view, you can actually quickly see the status, right? So I can pick a particular update, and right there, I'll be able to see whether it's red, yellow, green, right? You don't have to go into reports like in the business tool, generate a report to see a report on a per update basis, right? Now you can quickly get at that information right there. You can also do simple things like filtering right in the UI. So I want to say, I want to see all the updates that are needed, right? And do a quick refresh and we'll just sort it out and I'll be able to see that. Now that cool thing that we've added is you can do simple things like add additional columns. This is something you couldn't do in the tool UI. So right there, if you care about MSRC severity ratings, you can add it to your columns, or KB article numbers, you can add into your columns right away. So let me add this one. Right, I can add that column in here. And because these are the critical updates, there's no MSRC columns. If I go into the security updates, I'll be able to see that information. So that's a cool way to actually, how do you call it? See what's going on with respect to a particular update. You say you want to find out what are the updates for a particular month. You can go in there and you can sort by each one of those updates and see what's going on. The other neat thing that you can do is right-click on an update right there and generate a report. You can look at the file information, what files are related to that particular update, right? All the things that are downloaded. On this server, I have all the locales, so you can see all the files and where they are located and stored in there, right? That's something that was pretty hard to get to in the WSAS tools. If you want to know, hey, what file changed, etc., you couldn't get that information. Let me move over to the computers node. In 3.0, we have this concept now of nested groups and overlapping groups. So unlike 2.0, a computer can be in one group or more than one group. 2.0, you could be in the one group or the all computers group. In 3.0, a computer could be in multiple groups. So I look at this. I don't have a machine in here, but I have a couple of machines here that are both in the desktops group and in my exception group. And so I can do approvals at each level of update. So I can have a machine that's in servers and IS servers, and I can say all these updates apply to all servers except for my web servers, right? So you can get that level of granularity in approval process. The other thing that you can do is to be able to see what are your downstream or child servers talking to the parent. So right there you can see what are all the servers talking to your main server, whether they're replica or autonomous, so you can quickly manage them. We've added a lot more granularity in terms of the synchronization, right? So now you can see all your synchronizations. You can drill down into what happened per synchronization, whether I succeeded, whether I failed, on all the stuff. Reports, we've added a lot more reports. So you can go to update status summary. And we're using SQL reporting services in this area. So, I can run a report, I can expand it. So my screen is all wide. I can run a report and I can then save it to PDF or export to Excel. If I have other tools that use, I want to send this data to for more analysis or nicer graphs than what we build by default, you can also do that. Let me go back to the UI here. Other things that you can do in the UI is to be able to look at the reports for your, you can go to a per computer basis and look at, what the status on each particular computer is and all that kind of stuff. So we've added a lot more richness in the reporting than what we did in 2.0. Here's where we did a bunch of the options, right? So update source and proxy server is the same like before, but here are things that we've added. We've made a synchronization schedule a lot more granular, so you can go as quickly as 1 hour, every hour, go synchronize with Microsoft and get updates. In the past, it used to be once a day, so it didn't provide that level of flexibility. You could do that. You can do that now. Automatic approvals, this is the stuff that I talked about. It looks like your Outlook rules thing, right? So you can add all sorts of rules to it. There's a default rule that we provide, but you can go in there and create a new rule and mix and match under any number of combinations that you want in order to get a specific behavior that you want. This is also new for 3.0. So reporting roll-up. Here's the reporting roll-up thing that I mentioned, right? So you can say, hey, or when I do reports in the console, I want to see the report from all my replica servers rolled up automatically, so I can get a corporate level view, or I can choose not to see them, only look at reports for that particular machine out there. And then lastly, what else do I want to show you here? Email notifications is also another cool capability that we did a tool for in 2.0 that it's now integrated. So the idea is that you have, you don't want to be logging into work every weekend, but you want to know what your patch deployment status is. So you can configure an SMTP server that on a daily or weekly basis will send you reports as to how your deployment is going without you having to log into the server. So you can basically run in a hands-off manner if you wanted to. And then there's some personalization options here that you can do, right? Some basic thing. How many of you have the SSL to-do item on your SAS2 server? Anyone? Yeah. You want to get rid of it, right? Okay, so we've now provided a way for you to actually filter out the to-do items if you don't want to see them, right? We put them there as an informational thing to help you, but if you want to remove them, you can go into personalizations and clean up what types of to-do items that you wanted to see or not. So overall, we've added a lot of little things in there that we think makes the deployment management of the product much better than it was in 2.0. Another cool thing that you could do here is you can actually add multiple servers into the same console. So if you have multiple servers that you want to really manage, you can quickly add them to the server and they'll just show up automatically in the node on the left. And then when you go to the update level view, you see a summary deployment status across all those servers. So you don't have to have multiple IE windows like you did in 2.0 to go manage them. Okay. All right, so that's sort of the UI at a glance. I'll come back to it later as we walk through the deployment stuff. You guys like it? Cool. All right, so let's go. So let's go to some basics about deployment. So the requirements have changed, right? We no longer support Windows 2000 server. You have to be running Windows 2003 SP1 in order to run WSAS 3.0. We also support Windows Server 2008 server. We've been supporting beta form since the beta 3, but we support it in sort of a limited fashion. It works, but sort of not officially until Windows Server 2008 releases, and we'll support it fully at that point. But you can still run it on the beta or release candidate versions if you want to. We don't support SQL 2000 anymore, so we support only SQL 2005, SP1 or greater. We require .NET Framework 2.0. The WSAS 2.0 use .NET 1.1 for all these APIs. 3.0 requires .NET 2.0. So if you've written custom URL tools, etc., against the APIs, you need to go look at them, make sure they run against the 2.0 API. The other thing that the server does is just like previously, it supports all the locales for Windows, both server and client. So 25 locales for the client, 18 locales for the server. It supports all of them. And the UI is dynamic. So if you install the product, it's one package, you install on a German system, the UI automatically convert into German for you if you wanted that capability. So let's go about deployments, right? There are a number of deployment scenarios that you could get into. There's the basic deployment, download it, install it, and you're all set, right? But there are other complications that you could get into depending on your particular environmental needs, and we'll walk through them, right? When do you use hierarchies, right? Replica or autonomous, how do you make that decision? What do you do with roaming laptops? Or a lot of users now have laptops and are roaming around. What do you do with them? Or say you work for a government agency where you have private or secure networks that don't have direct internet access. How do you update those machines in those environments? So I'll walk through a bunch of those. But the basic deployment is simple. Take a server, download, install. If you already have group policy deployed for your clients talking to that server, they automatically talk to the server. They find out whether there's a new version of the client, and they'll automatically self-update to that new version of the client. Now, there were some press articles over the past few months or so around client self-update and what the behavior is, right? So I wanted to talk briefly about that. So the client self-update is something that's native to the infrastructure. So when you redirect your client to talk to the WSA server, the first thing it does anytime it talks to the server is to check to see if there's a new version of itself, and then it would download that new version, install before installing other updates. Now, when you're in a controlled environment, all your clients are talking to the WSA server, we often will release a self-update tree or an update to the WSA server that you can approve to install on the server before your clients get a new version. So if you are managing them, those updates or self-update clients will not automatically happen when there's a newer version. So just wanted to clarify that press stuff that went around us trying to secretly update your PC. That's not the case. So it's basic. You install, they register, they upload, and then you're all done with the deployment. But, there are a bunch of other things that you need to do, especially with 3.0, to make your life easier. As I mentioned, we don't have the web UI anymore. So what we recommend is, install the console in a remote mode, installing your XP machine, your Vista machine, so then you can manage those servers remotely with that same level of flexibility that you had when you had the IE browser out there. We've added, some new client configuration options that you should take advantage of, right? Key things there that are the same, but I wanted to highlight is for desktops, we highly recommend you deploy and configure them for scheduled install, right? For servers, automatically download but notify for install so that you can then manage the actual server patch and reboot cycle in a much better way. For Vista, I mentioned the peer caching. We actually got in our own network, internal deployment, we got about a 70% cache hit rate with Vista PCs on a local subnet. So that's a pretty high rate and will save you a lot of WAN traffic when you go deploy Vista. That'll be a big benefit that you can have in those environments. So that is the basic deployment, good things to do. But there are obviously interesting scenarios around security, what database to use. We don't support SQL 2000 anymore. So what do you do for SQL 2005? What do you do for NLB, and how do you configure those things? So we'll talk about those, right? This is basically a basic. The guidance is no different than what it was in WSS 2.0. Use SSL as much as possible for your server. Always make sure your WSS is behind a firewall so it's not susceptible to attack. and apply all the secure best practice in terms of deploying servers for your WSAS or for any Windows server in general. So this is something that it's a basic that I wanted to talk about that you should just do, right? Now, you can even get an extra level of security when you configure SSL between the client and the server. We've added a policy to the client to be able to have signed content come through from the WSAS server also that you can take advantage of. So please make sure SSL is good. You know, the threats are not only outside your network, there may be threats inside your network. The vendors, etc., bringing in laptops in. So it's always good practice to have that SSL connection in there. Database. There are two options, right? We now use the Windows internal database for our deployment, right? Some of you may have heard the name WUCon or, whatever. It's basically the same as SQL 2005. The only difference between the Windows internal database and the public SQL 2005 is the regular SQL has all the management tools, etc. The Windows internal database is restricted to Windows components, so you cannot write your own application to run on top of that. Only Windows components like WSAS can use it, right? So you can either use the Windows internal database, or if you have an existing SQL environment, you have DBAs that, have large SQL boxes that you can take off, then you can look at remote SQL. The key thing, though, is make sure that you pick an option that works for you, right? In most cases, the internal database should give you all the performance that you need in terms of a deployment, right? With now the Management Studio free download from Microsoft.com for managing SQL Express and stuff, you can actually download those and use those to manage a server, backup, etc., without having to resort to PostSQL, etc., to do those tasks. So there's no good reason why you should go do internal or external SQL, remote SQL, unless you have that need. Now, a key thing to notice, though, is that if you have SQL 2000, you need to upgrade that SQL 2000 to 2005 before you start the deployment of WSAS 3.0. We don't support, otherwise your deployment will end up failing. The other thing improvement that we've made is to have the SQL front end and back end be unified. In 2.0, you had to run SQL on your server, your WSAS server. Then you had to go to the SQL server and run a setup also there in a background backend mode to configure it to be remote SQL. With 2.0 or 3.0, sorry, we've made it a unified deployment. So you run setup on your WSAS server. If you have permissions to that remote SQL box, you'll be able to configure the database in that automatically for you. NLB, right? We got a lot of requests for it, so we put it in there, and this is a scenario that a System Center Configuration Manager actually leverages quite a bit. So what you want to do is, if you want to do NLB, we support up to 4 front-end servers talking to a common SQL backend, and recommend that SQL backend to be clustered. So you basically have 4 to 1, and then a cluster SQL in the backend, and you'll be able to then, have those machines work. All of them will have a shared content folder, though. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, okay, what benefits am I getting with respect to having NLB versus having a WSAS, a single server that you manage, you back up the data on a regular basis? Because to reinstall the server is about an hour to synchronize metadata, etc. But if you're backing up all your data and your content, you can quickly restore it, and so you have to weigh the cost of that operation versus the reliability and redundancy that you want for that scenario. For servers, I already talked about this, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but this is something that I often get questions about. What should we do for servers? Should we configure them to be automatically install updates? And we actually don't recommend that. We know the servers are servicing a bunch of PCs that are talking to it. So we recommend automatically download and use our scripts or APIs we've provided to be able to control that installation, or have somebody remotely log in and go press yes, I want to install it when you're comfortable with that. The key thing though is that when you install, you want to do a reboot right away, because your patches are not applied until a reboot has occurred in most cases for Windows. So let's talk about hierarchies. When and why do you want to use WSUS hierarchies, right? There are a couple of reasons why you may use a hierarchy. A, you have a lot of branch offices that, with different administrators or different control, or you have a lab environment that you want to control or treat separately. You can achieve similar stuff with target groups, but the key benefit that you get with hierarchies is in the branch office scenario. Or you have slow one links in places where you want to control how content goes there, right? So replica, as I mentioned earlier, in Trio, the replica can get a subset of the languages from your upstream server. It doesn't need to get all the content, or it does not get all the content. So you can use replicas in remote locations, so you have one central point of administration. And with a roll-up reporting, you never really need to log into that box. All the reports roll up to your upstream server, so in your single console, you can see what's happening in all those different branch office scenarios. New things that we've added, I already talked about them, so I'll skip this one, just for FYI. So what it ends up looking at is, you have one at the top. You can have either a replica or one server, one child server, be a replica or an autonomous server. It doesn't matter to that top node server. So you can have multiple replicas, multiple autonomous, etc. Now, you can go all excited and, do depth of hierarchies. But then the more hierarchies you have, the more bandwidth or hit you start having on your top node server. And so when you have hierarchies, you probably start running into some performance issues if you start getting about 100,000 PCs showing up in the report on the top node server, because all the clients are sort of rolling up to it. So that's something that you need to consider when you're doing multiple hierarchies out there for your server. Actually, skip this UI. I wanted to show you guys UI here, but I sort of showed it already, so I'll skip it. The other scenario is around, the air gap scenario. This is primarily around, as I mentioned earlier, intelligence institutions, governments, etc. Or in some cases, a ship or aircraft carrier or a cruise ship somewhere. You have a network on board, but you don't have really direct internet communication or connection, or you don't have a cheap internet connection. So what you do is we provide a way for you to export your data from your server that has internet connectivity and then import it back into the one on the local network. It's same capability as the WSUS 2.0. It hasn't changed. We've just added more commands into the WSUS utility to help you with that process. So I'm going to add a picture so it looks pretty. So that's sort of how it looks like. Roaming laptops. This is an interesting one, right? So the big thing here is this notion of you have users roaming out there. How do you configure it? There are two ways you can go about it, right? One is to have your WSUS server hosted directly on the internet, right? And we publish the white paper for the WSUS 2.0 that still applies to 3.0 that you can use. You can publish the site using ISA, and then have all the clients authenticate through it. The other way you could do it is to use DNet net masks to configure it. So what you can do is in each site you have a DNet mask for the same, have an alias for the server in each subnet that maps to the same name, and then you in your DNS you configure the ordering. So if the machine is a particular subnet, they go to the local server. If they go to another network, they go to the other server. But they are all virtually the same thing. So you can address the reporting issue of machines roaming around. Now you run into instances where a machine may show up in one server and then wouldn't show up again because guess what? I traveled to Barcelona, I connected to the Barcelona WSUS server, I may not come here again for another year or so. So that record will become stale. So that's something that you may want to look at using the cleanup wizard to go clean up over time for machines that may not show up again. But the key thing to note is that whenever a client talks to a server, it does a check across all approved updates for that server. So the most up-to-date status of that client will be reported to the server that is closest to it. So if you want to really see if this machine is healthy, you can find which server did it last report to and see the most up-to-date status in that instance. So I've talked about initial deployment. What about if you're moving from existing SAS2 environment or SAS10 like the gentleman here, right? SAS10, you're actually out of luck. You have to do a lot more work, right? We don't support a direct upgrade from SAS10 to 3.0. So the two options, you can go to 2.0 and then upgrade to 3.0 or install 3.0 and then move the data and redo all your approvals in that regard. But from 2.0 to 3.0 is fairly straightforward. You run setup on the server, say upgrade, and it just goes for 30, 40 minutes and it's done. You don't need to do anything. All your target groups, all your approvals are preserved in that migration scenario. The other thing that you can do is if you want to install on a new server, we have a sample tool called the WSUS Migrate that you can run on your existing server. It will take the approvals and target groups, save it to an XML file, and then on a new server that you install, you can run it again and it will apply to it, so you don't need to go in and reapprove every update in the UI. Now, when you're upgrading a hierarchy, there's a key thing to note that it's kind of important for the success of your deployment. A WSUS 2.0 server can synchronize from a 3.0 server, but a 3.0 server cannot synchronize from a 2.0 server. So you want to start your deployment from the top, where you put a 3.0 on there, and then you go side by side and migrate them over time to 3.0. But they'll all still be able to talk to the 3.0 server at a top level node. So I talked about it. I talked about this SQL 2000 scenario. Make sure if you're upgrading and you're running on SQL 2000, your database needs to be upgraded to SQL 2005 before you continue on that. Yeah. So this is the same I talked about, so I'll skip that. Right. The key things that when you upgrade a hierarchy, right, I'll keep reiterating because the roll-up report was a key scenario that we got a lot of feedback on, right? Make sure after you upgrade to 3.0, take advantage of the roll-up reporting status, you know, configure the settings, say, hey, roll up my replica, report up to the server, so then over time it will ease your management headache, right? If you want to synchronize more than once a day, you know, you can set it every 6 hours or so. Now, I'm not sure you need it, but it's also a good configuration to have. Now, what happens when you finish the deployment? How do you troubleshoot, right? The common problems you end up running into around synchronization with the servers, client self-update, clients not reporting, you know, etc. What do you do? The key things that we often find when we troubleshoot customer problems around synchronization is around proxy and firewall settings, right? You may have authenticated proxy, but you forgot to set it or configure it. The initial configuration wizard that I talked about will help you identify where your problems are and fix them, right? Sometimes, for some reason, your self-update tree may not be on the server on port 80, so that's something that you want to go check. What we call the if you go to IIS, there'll be a self-update under the WSUS piece. It will be on port 80, and you need to check to make sure it's actually configured, right? We have a simple file that you can look at and try to hit it from one of the clients, and it'll tell whether, if you get a prompt, say download a file, then you know your self-update tree is there. look, we've added an option to the WSAS util called check health. So after you finish your deployment, a quick thing to do is to run this command. It's on your program files, update services, WSAS util check health, and it'll go through all the basic configurations that it expects the server to have to function properly, and it'll log those events into event viewer for you. So you can go look at them and say, oh, is everything healthy or something didn't work? So that's a quick way to troubleshoot your deployment. On the client side, the Windows Update log, the same log, it has everything to do with the client. So you can tell whether the client talked to the server or not. How many of you have played with the Windows Update or log file? Very few. So actually, let me switch and show you the log file. I think it's actually useful and for folks to be aware of. So this is the Windows Update or log file, right? As you can tell, it's very verbose, right? But it has information here like, whether updates were found, shut down, what happened with the install, etc. If there are any errors, they'll also show up here with a timestamp, right? It will show you it's installing, it started installing updates and all sorts of stuff. So there's a lot of detail that you'll be able to see in here. Right, so you can look whenever the client gets an error, you'll be able to see that information there. So it's a really great tool for troubleshooting client deployments. Like the client didn't talk to the server, it didn't show up. How do you find out what's going on? You could do that also. You could look at this log. Let me find the word proxy. So here, at the bottom here, it tells me the updates that are currently waiting for me to install that I've installed, so you can see. So all that richness of information is in the log. Let's see. I wanted to show you the proxy log because it's always interesting to see what proxy settings are being used for the server. That's a common issue to find out, okay, what proxy is the server using, or is the client even talking through a proxy or auto proxy? That list will also be in the log for you to look at. So it's a good deployment option. The other thing is on the server, everything that we do is set up is in the setup log on the server. So if something failed or whatever, you can go look at that and see what's going on. Configuration Manager 2007. How many of you are using Configuration Manager 2007? Very few. So the key thing for Configuration Manager 2007 goes to the theme that I mentioned earlier. That is, we are trying to unify all the infrastructure for scanning and distributing updates on a common technology. So for Configuration Manager 2007, all its update management capabilities is based on WSAS. What that means is that WSAS is a requirement for Configuration Manager 2007. Unlike the ITCU or ITMU for SMS 2003, you now have access to all the content that is available in WSAS. With ITMU, you could only get access to the critical and security updates. You couldn't get access to all the other content like definition updates and all those things. You now will be able to get all that content with 2007 when you go deploy, right? The key thing is that the UI, all the management is through the Configuration Manager 2007 UI, right? So you don't have to ever go look at the WSAS UI if you're using Configuration Manager 2007. You use all the public APIs and you manage it just like you manage all your other Configuration Manager 2007 components. You want to install the WSAS in your software update points, and I'll go into some specifics of it. Second here, right? Basically, in your software update point role, you have WSAS plus some software that SMS configures on there. From then, you can then do things like issue synchronizations, figure out which updates a machine needs, install them, and deploy them. All the file distribution and stuff will still use your Configuration Manager 2007 distribution points. So all the flexibility and control you have for distributing in that environment, you'll be able to get that power with the full content of WSAS 3.0. There's a session, MGT303, tomorrow morning. I believe it's at 10 a.m. or 9 a.m. 9 a.m. So you get up early, and there'll be a full session of the specifics of that configuration and how that deployment works. I think it's a great benefit for those of you that are using SMS 2003 and are going to Configuration Manager 2007. So the last thing I wanted to briefly talk about before I open up for questions is about Service Pack 1. You may wonder, oh, we already have a Service Pack, and why are we doing a Service Pack? So the key goals of the Service Pack are support Windows Server 2008, which is close to coming out, so you can run it on that server scenario. Resolves a few customer issues that we got, and then also provide the infrastructure for some of our partners, in particular System Center mobile device management, right? Anybody looking at that product? System Center mobile device management. It's basically a System Center tool that allows you to manage updates and distribution of firmware onto Windows mobile devices. And that technology also will be leveraging the WSAS 3.0 infrastructure as the base for it. So if you deploy WSAS infrastructure across System Center Configuration Manager, Forefront Client Security, the System Center mobile device management server, you have the same infrastructure and the same way to manage that technology. You don't need to deploy different infrastructure. Specific details of the changes in the SP1. So you'll be able to actually manage WSAS from the Server Manager console. So when you go to Server Manager, WSAS will be a role. You'll be able to download it. You'll be able to manage and configure it all from the same server management UI, just like you can other Windows Server roles. Today with the Beta 3 of Windows Server 2008, you need to make some IIS configuration changes in order for it to work. Those will be addressed when we fully SP1 comes out. So on the specific customer feedback, when you do the computer detailed status and you export to Excel, unfortunately it doesn't work like you said it will work, so that's been fixed, so you can do export for that particular report. The other thing that we got feedback on while I was talking about the proxy settings is we got feedback that you sometimes actually have different proxy servers or proxy configurations for your environment. So we've added support for that. Different proxy uses different ports to go out, so we've added the flexibility to configure those in the UI. The other feature that we introduced in 3 was bulk approvals. Remember I talked about this nested target groups and overlapping target groups. When you went and did an approval, it tended to override some of the previous approvals or exceptions that we've done. So that issue has been fixed. So those are the sort of the 5 main customer feedback that has been fixed out there. The support, I mentioned the System Center Mobile Device Manager. The other thing that we're adding to make System Center Configuration Manager better is the ability for you to be able to deploy catalogs of drivers from Dell, HP, etc. through System Center Configuration Manager in a simple way. So you find catalog from Dell, HP, etc. that you can just one-click import into either System Center Essentials or System Center Configuration Manager and automatically deploy them just like you do any other thing. So those are the main changes for the WSAS SP1 that are coming out. So as you can tell, no major issues really there. So when will it be available? It's targeted for Windows Server 2008 release. So when that then becomes available, then it will be available out there for you to use. And it will just seamlessly upgrade. It will show up in the business console. You can choose to approve it or wait, just like any other update that comes through the pipeline. So in summary, I think WSUS 3 is a huge improvement over WSUS 2. Hopefully, I've gone through some of the things you need to think about with respect to deployment, and showing that if you have an existing 2 environment, it's a fairly straightforward upgrade, except you need to watch for your SQL 2000 deployment that you need to upgrade to SQL 2005. And if you really love the web UI, it no longer exists. So you need to install the remote console on your PC to do that management. And go to the MGT303 for those of you using SMS or System Center Configuration Manager 2007. So now open up for questions. So resources, you can see there's lots of information on our website, Microsoft.com update services, and please fill out a survey, and hopefully this was useful information for you. Questions, there are 2 microphones out there that please go there so they can record your question. Thanks for coming.
Can I ask about licensing?
Licensing.
I noticed on one of your slides you mentioned that you need a SQL cow for each WSUS client.
Okay, so let me clarify. The question is, do you use a SQL license or cow for WSUS client? The answer is no if you are using the Windows internal database. However, if you are using SQL 2005, the purchase product, then you need a cows. So it goes back to that recommendation around SQL 2005. If you already have licenses and deployments of it, then use it. But other than that, use the internal database so you don't have the licensing requirement. Other questions?
Can we run automated reports, export them to a web server that management can check on the database the actual status?
Yeah. So the question was, can we run automated reports that management can look at? And the answer is yes. We provide a set of public APIs they can use to run those reports. But my recommendation from an easy deployment perspective will be to put those managers in the read-only users group so they can go look at the console.
So I'm looking for that anybody in the company
Yeah.
can go to a website and get an overview, the number of systems which are fine, not fine, or horrible
Yeah. Yeah.
so that anybody without targeting the WSUS server can go to the website.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, you can do that using the APIs, and it's all public documented on MSDN and on our website. Question?
Hi, I have 2 questions, please. The first is, with the target groups in WSUS, is there any integration between those groups and groups in Active Directory?
Okay, great question. So the question was, are there any group integration between the groups in WSUS and the groups in Active Directory? The answer is yes and no. So specifically, you use group policy to configure the groups in WSUS. However, we don't take the groups you've already created in Active Directory and make them default groups of the client. So you need to do the mapping yourself. However, we've provided a sample tool out there on our website, again, that you can download, that will go to your Active Directory, get all the groups or machines in particular groups, auto-create those groups on your server, and then if the clients come, you can then move them around as necessary. But there's no direct tie-in to those 2 groups.
Can you use that tool also to keep them in sync over time?
Yes, you could use that too, but there's a management override for machines that may actually be orphaned or stale. Then you have to run the cleanup result on some basis to go clean up the ones that are orphaned. So there's some potential management overhead. but you
Okay.
could do that.
And the second question was, in previous versions of WSUS, I believe there was an issue with if you were sys-prepping machines and imaging them, there was a WSUS client ID
Yeah.
which wasn't cleared out.
Yeah.
So the WSUS server saw large numbers of machines as being the same machine for reporting
Yeah.
purposes. Is that issue still there?
So the question, I'm sure everybody heard it, so I won't repeat it, but that issue is resolved. So we actually we don't only use the client ID, but we also try to use DNS names and get both of them, and if they're the same, only show one in the UI. So that issue is resolved. We also changed the algorithm for the client ID to make it even more unique than what it was. So that issue does not exist.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible to set up test groups, test all the patches, and then copy the approvals from the test group to the production group?
Okay.
Or do I have to do it, check the approvals and approve it on production group again?
Okay, so the question is, can you take approvals, can you approve updates to a test group and then take the approvals and apply it to productions? There are a number of ways to do that. You could do that, but it's not a straightforward thing like, oh, take these approvals. One simple way is take the business migrate tool and run it. It's more work. The other thing you could do is use the concept of the overlapping groups. So you could have, a test group underneath the all computers group. And when you do approvals, you say, do not approve to the top node, but only approve to this test group. Once you're ready, then you can just change the approval to say now apply it to the other group also.
But I have to do it then on a fixed, I have to do it one by one for any approval or any security things.
Yeah, you would have to manage that in that instance, but we can walk through the specific scenarios and I can give you some specific examples on that. There are different ways to try and get at the same goal. Yeah. Yeah.
You jump over migration upgrade slide. That
Yeah.
it is the most interesting for me.
Tell me.
May you go back on that slide to
Okay, sure.
explain it, please?
Yeah. Is this one? Okay. So this slide, the main thing here is if you are installing on a new server and you want to migrate the content, right? It's very similar to what you do with respect to, the export and import or the disconnected network scenario. You install the server, you sync, so you get the metadata only. You already have your content on your other server already. So the first step is don't destroy your first server, your WSUS2 server. Keep it there. Install WSUS3 on the new server, synchronize and set it to only download content on approval. So only the metadata, the description of the updates come in. Then what you want to do is you take the content that you on the other server, copy it over to the new server, and then you're basically set. You can run the, how do you call it? You can run an option in the WSUS util that says, reset server. And what it'll do is it'll go through and link the metadata with the content that you've copied over. Another thing you could do is if you have target groups, use the WSUS migrate tool to copy the target groups and approvals over. Does that help? Sorry, I skipped over that one that I talked about that. So, yeah.
The Vista bit security caching,
Yeah.
will it be available for the 60th one?
The question is, will Vista bits peer caching be available for Expo? And the answer is no. It's a bits 3.0 feature that's only available in Vista. Yeah. Yes, sorry.
I've got a question concerning exporting currently the current settings of installed and configured
Yeah.
WSUS3 server. When the server fails, is it possible to export the configuration I've done over months or even years to a settings file and import this settings file to a brand new WSUS MGT3 server to get up and running this new one exactly the same as the old one that
Okay.
died?
So the question was settings. Can you be specific? Is it the approvals or just the data?
It's just about everything concerning what's my upstream server, what's my approvals, what about my groups I created and approvals, just everything I did fine tune concerning the WSUS.
So the answer is it's not native in the UI, but I believe it's an option that WSUS migrate to that we can actually look at. I don't recall if that's specific thing, but I know in the APIs we actually have a way to look at my configuration and you can export it and you can then reapply. But I don't know if we've written a specific tool to deal with that scenario for you yet. So
Okay,
we
thank
can check. I can check after.
Okay,
for you.
thank you.
And I forgot to mention that I have a session this afternoon too that we can go into the specifics.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
If the server you're migrating from runs the internal database,
Yeah.
and you're migrating to a server running with SQL,
Yeah.
will this method still work, or is there any issues with that?
Yeah, it will still work because they are both SQL 2005 based.
Even though the source server was the internal database?
Yeah. Yeah, it
Okay.
will still work.
Okay, thanks.
And because you're backing up the data, you can then say, okay, now reattach this data to a database, a new thing. So that will still work.
I have two questions actually. The first one concerning progressive deployment in branch office scenarios. How would you implement that? Would you use groups? For example, if you want to deploy branches 1 to 500 one night and then 501 to 1,000 the next.
Yeah. So branch office deployment, I would say for that, you probably want to use groups. So then you can monitor deployment status per group. And then once you feel this group is done, then you can do the other one. That'll be one way. The other way will be, if depending on where your branch offices are, if you have different servers, I don't know if you have different servers or not, but if you have different servers, you can use that route also.
That's the follow-up question. Can Vista bit caching or an ISA server in the branch be used as a update point?
Yeah. So two pieces. So Vista peer caching, all the PCs will have to have access to the server, but after the first one downloads, if that first one is always on, then all the peers will get from it from that local subnet.
So you download only once to that first client?
Yeah, the first client will have to download. You don't have as much control, fine point control. Say PC A is the one that gets it. It's whichever one gets it first, then the others get it. Now, if you have ISA, I believe 2006 SP2, they allowed or added a capability to do byte level difference caching. So if you have that proxy server, ISA 2002 SP2, then what you could have is a scenario where even though all the clients, if they are not Vista, are going through that proxy to the server, ISA will cache those files, requests for the content, and then be able to serve it from it. I believe ISA 2006 SP2 has that set, and they have a white paper on how to do that.
And in that case, the clients will be configured to point to the ISA server in the branch.
No, they'll be pointing to your WSUS server still. They only get a metadata from the WSUS server. Some clients would have gotten content already, and so it will be in the ISA cache, and then the others get it from the ISA cache.
Okay. And then all clients will be communicating as far as reporting is concerned
Back-
up to the server.
Up to the server, yeah. So in the ISA case, you don't change your server, your clients to point to ISA. They still point at the WSUS, but the ISA configuration then proxies the download files.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And this gentleman, I can see. Yeah.
Okay, all right. What sort of advice can you give on, because I've got an Active Directory database, I've got a WSUS database. They're obviously not the same, but what do I do about clients that don't call into my WSUS server because they have a client issue, but are in my database? Is there any, what can you give for advice to sort of like make a comparison between what I have in my corporate AD database and what doesn't call into my WSUS server.
So it's similar to the earlier question that a gentleman asked. So what you can do is take that tool that I mentioned called AD import tool, right? So you can import the computers from those groups into your server. And then what would then happen is when the clients talk to them, the ones that are actually talking to the server will be there, and the ones that have not contacted the server for some reason will be the ones that say, you can generate the reports. Computers that haven't talked to the server or whatever, that'll be the only sort of way to do that at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, regarding the caching in a way.
Yeah.
It's not possible to use a local file server as information source to point out a local file server instead.
No, you cannot use a local file server as an installation source. It always has to be talking to a WSUS server, or in the BitSpear caching case, what Bits is doing is when we say Bits, go download the file, it says, oh, you configure Bits, say, look for PS first, and then Bits looks for it first. So it always has to be talking to a server.
If I get more than 500 sites, I don't want to have 500 WSUS servers, and they are on the slow one links.
Okay, so in the slow one link scenario, one thing that you can, do they have good internet connectivity out of there? Okay, so what you could do in that scenario is to you can have a WSUS server and say, host the content on Microsoft Update, right? And so what happens is only the approvals come across your one link, and then all the actual files actually get downloaded over the faster internet connection. That would be the way I would do it.
But the peer cache
Would help if you really exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So you right now use tree structure, so computer can get more groups.
Yeah.
Is it possible for computer to get tree structure?
Yeah, you can have different groups. A computer can be in different groups or overlapping. Let me bring it up. So in this case, let's see. I'm trying to see if there's a machine that's in both groups. So take for this particular computer, for instance, it's in the computers group. It's in desktops and test clients that are in different hierarchies. Right? So it can be in any order of stuff. Now there's a precedence issue around what wins, right? And so if, I forget the exact specifics, but there's a precedence rule. If a machine is in one group or more than one group that appears and you have different install actions, the install action of installing the update actually wins over if there's a detect only or some that kind of configuration. But yes, a computer can be in different groups at the same level. So to put in different groups, you basically, when you set a client policy, you separate them by semicolon. You just put it in by semicolon. Let me get this guy, he's been waiting, I'll come to you. Yeah.
We are in an environment you just described, where each WSUS server gets synchronized with Microsoft Update services according to its platform and language configuration, and only approvals are coming from a central site. So in this environment, is it independent with upgrading to WSUS3, or is it important that the central server from which the approvals come is first upgraded to WSUS3?
So let me make sure I get it. At the top you have server A. It approves content for servers B, C, D that are downstream, right? You have to upgrade A first to 3.0 because 2.0 can talk to 3.0, but 3.0 cannot talk to 2.0.
Okay, so it's also true for if you get only the approvals?
Yeah.
Because this is
Yeah.
the case or not?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
If I'm using client-side targeting
Yeah.
via GPO,
Yeah.
I can place them in multiple groups
Yeah.
by separate group by codec.
Semicolon. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
simple and that's great.
Yeah.
Hello. Suppose I have a configuration manager in place.
Mhm.
Then I have two possibilities to do these updates, right? The Vesas 3.0 MMC and the configuration manager MMC. And which one actually I should focus on?
So if you're using Configuration Manager 2007, use the Configuration Manager 2007 console.
So I don't need an MMC from
You need
Vesas,
MMC when you're installing the WSUS server, but you don't need to use that console to manage the server, because Configuration Manager 2007 does all the management from its UI for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We are thinking about deploying Internet Explorer 7, but we
Mhm.
don't have an Active Directory structure, so we can't apply any configurations about it. And I've heard that we can pre-configure the Internet Explorer 7 by the EAAK. And my question is, can we put the MSI, which is pre-configured by EAAK, afterwards in the WSUS repository to deploy it using WSUS?
So the only way you can do that is you have to write some code to do that, because we don't provide any user experience to publish content through WSUS. So you would have to use the APIs to write, some code, call our APIs deployed. You need to change the client to trust signed content. Your content has to be signed. The new MS has to be signed.
Yes.
And then you need to configure the client to trust signed content from your WSUS server. And then thirdly, you need to have some UI to show the updates that you've deployed, because we don't show updates that come through the API in the UI.
Yes.
Right? So you can do those three steps, but the simplest way to either to use Configuration Manager 2007 or System Center Essentials that provides the UI for that.
Are there any white papers about using the UI?
The API, yes, we have an SDK that has samples and all the stuff on our website.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Other questions? Or? Yeah. It's 345 MGT304, and it's what's it called? Ask the expert or deployment and the interactive session. So mostly all questions. I wouldn't have a PowerPoint. We just ask questions like we're doing now and get an answer and chat about it. So, right. Thanks a lot, guys, for coming.